Hey guys, how's it going? This is a screencast about trophic structures. So in this recording we're going to be talking about species diversity, trophic structure, and bottom-up and top-down models. So the first thing we need to talk about is species diversity. Now when you're looking at a community, when you're looking at an ecosystem, you need to determine how diverse your community is. The way you do that is in two factors. The first is going to be species richness. Now, species richness is the number of species you have within your community. So, for instance, let's compare really quickly sample A and sample B here. Sample A, I see 3 species: ladybug, dragonfly, and butterfly. However, in sample B, I see only 2 species, butterfly and an ant. Now, if I'm comparing species richness, I would say that sample A has a greater species richness because it has 3 species compared to 2. Now, the second factor you need to look at for species diversity is relative abundance. So relative abundance is the number of individuals of each species within that community or ecosystem. And in this case, if I'm looking at sample B and sample A here, I see 4 butterflies and 4 ants in sample B. I see 5 butterflies, but only 1 dragonfly and 1 ladybug in sample A. So sample B wins in relative abundance because it has greater number of individuals for each of the species that it has. Sample A is a little bit lopsided, it's not very diverse, it's not going to be very stable. Okay? So, species richness, relative abundance determine how diverse your community or ecosystem is going to be. If we want to make these more diverse, if we want to increase the stability of these two, for sample A, I would have an increased number of ladybugs and dragonflies. For sample B, probably have another species in there to help kind of balance it out. Right? So the reason that biodiversity is important, the reason that we care about the species diversity, has to do with stability. Now, more diverse communities are more stable. So let's take a look at this diagram down here. In this diagram we have 3 communities. We have one that is a diverse community, we have a community that is dominated by blue species, and a community that is dominated by green species. Now, in the first year, it's an average climate year, and we have a large amount of biomass in all 3 of these. So let's take a look and see what happens the next year when the climate changes. Next year, it's a little bit warmer. Now, the green species is well adapted to this. They're gonna flourish. They're gonna have an increase of biomass in here. So they have increased biomass when it's warm. However, the blue species is not well adapted to this. They have a decrease in the amount of biomass. However, our diverse community, the biomass doesn't change. It doesn't matter because as soon as these blue species start going away, there are green species, these green organisms to fill in those empty niches. Okay? So let's take a look at the third year. In this third year here, we're going to have an increase in biomass, big increase, almost twofold, more than that, in the blue species community. In the green species community, we're going to have a decrease. So you're getting kind of these radical fluctuations from year 1 to year 3, where kind of you're up, down, you're up again, you're up, then you're down. And in these, there's all this vacant space here that could be filled in by another species. However, in our diverse community, we have these other species to fill it in. So the amount of biomass across the diverse community remains constant, remains stable, while these other ones that are single species, are not very diverse, have big fluctuations in biomass. Now, if we want to keep a stable environment, if we want to keep the energy flow and the flow of matter throughout this whole system going, we need to be diverse. We need to have constant biomass production. Okay? So, speaking of that, there is a way that this can get all ruined. This whole thing where it's a stable system can get disrupted. One way is through invasive species. Now, you guys have probably heard about a number of these, possibly the lionfish. So let's take a look at the lionfish here for a second. So the lionfish is an invasive species that exists in the coastal Atlantic waters, usually further south near the Caribbean coral reefs and all these sorts of things. It's becoming a big problem because these guys are not native, they're invasive, and they are predators. And what they do is come in and they will eat these juveniles, these little kind of young fish. This is a juvenile parrotfish. Now, a lot of these fish, when they're young or even when they're mature, their function, their niche in this coral reef environment is to come in and eat the algae. And by eating the algae and preventing it from getting on the coral, they're maintaining their habitat, and they're maintaining the habitat for a number of other organisms. So these guys help maintain the coral reef. The problem, however, comes in when you have these lionfish and they are eating these juveniles. And if they're eating the juveniles, there's nobody to prevent the algae from taking over. And what happens, and what is happening, and the big problem with this, is that algae is overtaking a lot of these coral reefs, and it's disrupting and killing the whole ecosystem. So that's one of the big reasons that there is a big push to get rid of these invasive species, not only the lionfish, but a variety of others all around the world. Okay? So, in addition to invasive species, this all ties into our trophic levels. Now, trophic levels, kind of the way that energy is transferred throughout an ecosystem. When we're looking at trophic structure of an ecosystem or within a community, it's the way that you connect these organisms, producers to consumers, and so on. And as you're doing this, there is a flow of energy and matter all throughout this ecosystem, this food web, or these trophic structures that we have going on. So for instance, take a look at this desert ecosystem. And in this we have our producers, we have our cacti and all these grasses and shrubs. They are taken up by our primary consumers, which are the rodents, the lizards, and the insects. They are then eaten by secondary consumers, and so we're still getting energy flow throughout these. And these secondary consumers are then taken up by tertiary consumers. So as you can see, we get energy flow from these producers all the way up to these tertiary consumers. Now, one important thing you guys need to look at as you're examining these diagrams, that these arrows, wherever they're originating, down here, the base of the arrow, that is where the energy starts. Now, where the arrow is pointing is where the energy is going to flow to. So the energy here from these autotrophs, from these producers, this grass in this case, is flowing from here up into the rabbit. So the rabbit's taking that energy, and we have a flow of energy, we have a flow of matter to this rabbit. And next, if this rabbit gets eaten by a cougar, for example, the energy from that rabbit is going to flow up and into the cougar. Okay? So these food chains that you guys look at, these food webs that we've got going on, they can be extremely complex within these environments. They are what link together all these different trophic levels. Okay? Now, if we want to model this, there are two ways. We have the bottom-up and the top-down model. Now, in the bottom-up model, we have stuff starting from the bottom, which in this case, if we're looking at, say, a lake or a reservoir, we have nutrients, and those nutrients get taken up by phytoplankton. Phytoplankton are eaten by the zooplankton, which are then eaten by these shadfish. The shadfish are then eaten by the bass. And as you're going up, if you get an increase in nutrients, you're probably going to get an increase all the way up and through to the population of the bass, just because it's bottom up. If we have an increase in the bottom, it's going to affect all the way up to the top. Now, if you also get a decrease in dissolved nutrients, then you would see a decrease in the bass, just because each step of the way, your energy levels are changing. And if you change the basal amount of energy, it's going to affect the population and the biomass of your community. Now, on the flip side of that, we have the top-down model. Now, this, for example, for you guys, we have some sort of control over energy flow in the structure of our trophic levels in our trophic system here, from the top all the way down. So in top down, say we get some sort of disease, something happens with the white bass in these communities. If the white bass population decreases, they are going out of this place, you would get an increase in the shad, right? There's nothing to eat all the shad. Now, if there's an increase in shad, there's going to be no kind of control over these guys, and they will have an increase in population, and their increase in population is going to cause a decrease in the amount of zooplankton and phytoplankton and all these things, and eventually you're going to lead to a decrease in the nutrients here. Okay? Because there is no control at the top, you're getting and you're seeing all the ramifications of that, all the effects, all throughout the lower levels. Okay? So that's it for trophic structure. Next, we're going to be talking about succession disturbance and how that affects an ecosystem.